Did you know that almost 50 years ago, one of the most mysterious disappearances ever recorded in the United States took place? Do you know the story of what's known as the American Dyatlov Pass? Plumas National Forest is a United States national forest covering 4,640 square kilometers located at the northern end of the Sierra Nevada in California. This forest is not only known for its native species and vast vegetation, but also for the terrible discovery that was made there. June 4th, 1978. That day, a group of motorcyclists who were on a trip in the area arrived at an old trailer maintained by the Forest Service. These trailers are meant to serve as shelters for those who work in these harsh climate territories where storms are common and can, among many other things, block roads. The motorcyclists were ready to spend a day testing their engines and challenging themselves to ride the winding natural trails, until they saw the shelter and all their attention turned to it. Perhaps the factor that encouraged them to finally approach the place was that they saw one of its windows was broken. Had an animal gotten inside? Curious, but with no expectations other than finding everything in disarray, they approached and knocked on the door. When it became clear that no one was going to open the door for them, they went in through the opening that was exposed, being careful not to cut themselves on the shards of glass. The first thing that happened was that they smelled the terrible odor. That was not a good sign. Once again, they pictured a lost and disoriented animal that had gotten into the trailer and then couldn't get out. However, what they saw was much more horrifying. On a small bed and under 8 sheets, there was a person in a state of decomposition. It was a person with a long beard and severely frostbitten feet, showing early signs of gangrene. The strangest thing? Even though it could be assumed that the individual had died from cold, hunger, or both, there were plenty of other coats, more blankets, and canned food in the rest of the shelter, enough to feed a group of people for months. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because in this case there are plenty of clues, but what we're missing are the answers. Every step we take, instead of clarifying things or bringing us closer to a resolution, will make us feel like we're part of a huge puzzle that just keeps getting bigger. What really happened that distant night when everything took place? What theories are there about it? What vital information came to light recently? To answer these and other questions, we're gonna delve into the strange case of the Yuba City 5. If you're interested in these kinds of cases and want us to make more videos like this, comment the word disappearance below. If there are more than 2,000 people commenting disappearance, we'll prepare another similar video. And you can also leave your suggestions about what topics you would like us to cover on this channel. Without further ado, let's begin. The guys from Yuba City, an agricultural town located in Northern California, used to be considered a quiet place. And while it's true that it still is, a dark aura has hovered over it since the winter of 1978. That year, a part of the map, usually free of conflict, became the scene of one of the cases that still fascinates investigators, both professionals and amateurs. The reasons? On February 24th, a group of friends left their homes and never returned. The group was known as the Yuba 5, or the Yuba Boys, and it was made up of 5 men who used to spend a lot of time together. Let's get to know them. They are Bill Sterling, 29 years old, Jack Madruga, 30, Ted Wire, 32, Jack Hewitt, 24, and Gary Matias, 25. They all had a mild intellectual disability, but they were functional, independent, and above all, very close. Gary acted as a sort of leader. In his case, the disability was minor or even non-existent, according to some documents. However, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition he kept under control thanks to the pills he took every day. Ted, the oldest, was a calm former janitor who had developed a close relationship with the youngest of the group, Jack. On their side, Bill and Madruga were also very close and best friends. Madruga, like Gary, had been in the army, where he worked as a truck driver. His work had been impeccable, and his skill behind the wheel had been proven on more than one occasion. Gary, on the other hand, had been discharged for psychiatric reasons due to his condition. In addition, he had gone through periods of addiction and was the only one with a record that wasn't exactly clean. Even so, he had learned a lot during his days as a soldier and boasted about his experiences to the others, who knew he was exaggerating but enjoyed listening to him. They all still lived with their families and not only spent long hours together watching movies or playing board games. They were also basketball fans and were part of a local team, the Gateway Gators. Training and spending time on the court was their favorite pastime. That activity had made them stronger as a group, and they used to proudly wear their jerseys. The night their lives would take a turn as bizarre as it was unusual. They were all particularly anxious and nervous. The next day, they would play a crucial match that could determine the fate of the team they loved so much. If they won the match, they could compete in the Paralympic Games. That goal had been tempting them for a long time, and now they were just one step away from achieving it. Maybe because they felt impatient, maybe to relax, or simply because they loved basketball. That's why they decided that afternoon, the afternoon before the important match, they would go to Chico to watch a college game. Before leaving, Ted would leave his clothes folded and ready on the bed with his jersey perfectly hung up. Gary would insist to his mother not to move his alarm clock from its place. Jack had reminded his family not to wake him up the next day because he planned to get up by himself. Everyone was brimming with excitement. They left early in Jack Madruga's car. A '69 Mercury Montego Madruga was the designated driver because of his previously mentioned background in the forces. Also, he didn't let anyone else drive his vehicle. The five of them left, shouting and talking as usual, making bets among themselves about the outcome of the game they were going to watch. Even though it was snowing, there were no warnings. Everything seemed to be in order. None of the people who greeted them that afternoon imagined that they would never see them again. A road without logic. From some of the testimonies that were later collected, it was learned that the friends did indeed reach their destination. They had their tickets checked when entering the stadium, and once there, they enjoyed the match. They laughed, cheered, argued about plays, and ate some candy during halftime. Not much more is known about what happened during the game, which would later trigger a series of chilling speculations. For now, what matters is that the next record of the group was when they left the stadium. Around 10 at night, the young people stopped at a store to buy more junk food and soda. Those who saw them there noticed they were relaxed, although a bit reserved. However, that was how they usually were, not very inclined to stand out or engage in long conversations with strangers. After paying, they got into the car and began a return journey that would never actually happen. And the thing is, even though Madruga would head toward the road that led them home, something strange would happen along the way. If the man had driven south the 80 kilometers that separated them from Yuba in less than an hour, he would have been dropping his friends off at their respective homes. Then he would have gone home, gone to bed, and today this story wouldn't exist. But that's not what happened. Around midnight, the boys' families began to contact each other. Everyone was worried since there was no news from the men. By 2 in the morning, some parents had already gotten into their cars and were driving along the roads, looking toward the shoulder, searching for signs of an accident, or anything that could justify such an unusual delay in people who had fixed and well-established routines. They also called hospitals and police stations, all in vain. Only at dawn did the police agree to take their report. By then, the families of the 5 from Yuba knew that something bad had happened. Once the appropriate alerts were issued, a search began that quickly reached a regional scale. The police from Bad and Yuba counties began a difficult search operation. The results? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The first 24 hours passed, then 2 days. The newspapers had already devoted their center pages to the matter, and the mystery, although intriguing, soon began to give way to other news. Even though the relatives of the missing people kept repeating that all the men were perfectly functional despite their conditions. Many journalists showed their prejudices, suggesting that people like that shouldn't have a vehicle. Within this discouraging scenario, what happened on February 28th renewed hopes of being able to understand what had happened 3 nights before. That day, a ranger from Plumas National Forest called the investigators who were racking their brains over the case to inform them that he had seen the much sought-after Mercury, whose photo was plastered all over the city. And he hadn't seen it recently, but on February 25th itself. It's just that at that moment he hadn't paid attention to it because he wasn't up to date with the news. The officers considered that the delay in reporting it was another negative factor, knowing that the chance to reach the car of the 5 friends had been lost just one day after they were declared missing. It's a detail that for years tormented the people closest to those boys. However, it's likely that even if they had arrived in time, the tragic fate couldn't have been avoided. The thing is, to begin with, the car was found in a rather curious place. Madruga's Mercury was on the Oroville-Quincy Highway, more than 70 miles from the stadium, at an altitude of 4,300 feet and far from any road that led to the friend's house. And that was just the beginning of the mystery, because when they checked the car, the consternation only grew. A do not cross tape was soon tied around the car. Cones were placed so that traffic wouldn't pass nearby, and they waited for professionals, who inspected it with the proper equipment and white gloves. The results of the thorough analysis were made public as soon as possible. The car had no damage, the fuel tank was almost full, and the engine worked perfectly. It also had the keys in the ignition, and one of the windows was left down. On the floor there was trash, empty cans, snack packages, crumpled paper, not much else. No sign of the friends. However, with what was discovered, it was enough for the first questions to arise. What was the car doing in those latitudes, in a place so far from the usual route? Why had they driven up the mountains, with how dangerous that place was in the winter? Why had they abandoned the car if it didn't have any problems? Where were the 5 from Yuba? The possible answers didn't take long to appear, and with them came more questions. What if the snow had blocked their way, and trying to get out had become impossible because of the darkness and the blizzards? Could that make sense? Some marks on the asphalt helped that theory gain relevance, but if that was the case, could it be? Had the 5 of them gotten out of the car and gone into the woods with the little clothing they had on? Why hadn't they tried to wait there until dawn? Why go out into the open? Had they gone into a crisis because of fear and desperation? There were many doubts, and as the hours passed, they only managed to multiply. It didn't make sense unless some factors that might have been overlooked were added to the whole equation. What if the friends weren't going alone? What if someone had followed them and that's why they strayed from their safe route? What if someone had forced them out of the car? What if they had seen something that scared them so much that they preferred to go into the woods? The mystery deepened after the police towed the car to the station for a more thorough inspection. The underside of the Mercury showed no dents, scratches, or mud scrapes, not even on its low-hanging muffler, despite having recalled a long drive on a bumpy, rutted mountain road. Either the driver had been extremely careful, or it was someone familiar with the road. It's no secret that Madruga is very good behind the wheel. But is he so good that his car would remain unscathed after that journey, especially since he was also carrying 4 other adults with him? How did he manage to navigate such a complex road without knowing it beforehand? Trying to explain this led some to suggest that it was as if the car had been teleported. That assumption led to talk of flying saucers and a possible abduction. The case once again became the center of attention, and experts in various fields were invited to prestigious radio and television shows to give their opinions about the incident. While everything was turning into a show, the investigators launched a strong campaign to explore the paths that were on the sides of the highway. Assuming that the friends had to be somewhere not too far away, men, dogs, and machines got ready to begin that new stage. But then, the harsh weather conditions caused the entire operation to be interrupted. Some rescuers even got stranded, and their lives were put at risk. To make matters worse, the urgency intensified when Gary's family told the press that they had discovered their son hadn't taken with him the medication that kept his illness under control. The boy had assumed all along that he would be home by the time he needed to take his next dose. However, now that it was clear he hadn't returned, how would he manage his mental condition? How would he face his schizophrenia when it broke out without the chemical relief of the pills? Faced with the impossibility of continuing the search and with a new countdown hanging over their heads, the police decided not to sit idly by. Without wasting a second, they began offering a substantial reward to anyone who could provide valuable information about the friends. At the same time, a thorough sweep was conducted in the area with hundreds of interrogations. That's how some rather curious testimonies reached the detectives. Testimonies that instead of clarifying the situation only made it more and more labyrinthine. Let's go back to February 24, 1978. This time, instead of following the steps of the 5 friends who were heading to watch a basketball game without knowing how much their lives would change in a few hours, we're going to follow Joey Jones. Joe was from California. He was 55 years old. And that afternoon, he had driven to near Rogers Cow Camp in the Plumas National Forest. His intention was to see if the place had the right conditions to take a trip with his family the coming weekend. After making the necessary rounds and taking mental notes of the passable roads, Joey got ready to return home. However, an early storm had forced him to stop. The road he was traveling on had filled with snow and his car had gotten stuck. When he got out to push it, Joey made an effort that resulted in a sharp pain in his chest. At first, he tried to stay calm. He went back to his vehicle, lay down on the back seat and tried to take deep breaths. The pain, far from going away, became sharper and sharper. At that very moment, Joey was certain he was having a heart attack. Knowing he was miles away from any help, the man began to be tormented by horrible mental images. He thought about his wife and children. Some tears fell from his eyes as he felt everything he saw and heard begin to fade away. The world around him seemed to slowly fade away, and Joey had a second epiphany. He would lose consciousness right there. He would die far from all his loved ones, in the middle of an unknown road. It was at that moment that he saw the lights through one of the windows. Was he hallucinating? The brightness was joined by the sound of a powerful engine, the engine of a pickup truck, to be exact. A glimmer of hope lit up in Joey's feverish mind, and as best he could, he sat up and began to call for help. He thought he saw the pickup truck stop a little further ahead and some shadows getting out of it. They were some men and a woman with a baby. They were all arguing, but no one came to his call. What was going on? Joey kept shouting until his strength gave out. When he came to, he was lying in his car again and could see the lights of some flashlights passing nearby. This time he couldn't stand up, but he called for help again. The flashlights moved away. After hours of his terrible experience, with the car still stuck and the sun already rising, Joey felt well enough to stand up and start walking toward a shelter he had seen about 13 kilometers away. Walking slowly, he passed by a 1969 Mercury Montego which was empty. The man assumed that maybe this was the car the people with the flashlights had gotten out of, but he didn't give the matter much importance. His own emergency occupied all his thoughts, and he focused on reaching his destination. Joey's story has a happy ending. The man made it to where they could assist him. He was taken to the hospital, and it was confirmed that he had indeed suffered a heart attack. When he was able to recover, he learned about the case of the Yuba 5 and went to the nearest police station. To tell what he had seen and heard in his moments of agony, his testimony left the officers doubtful. Could the account of someone who had surely been under the effects of a terrible shock be trusted? And assuming that Joey had seen and heard what he said, why had no one helped him when he asked for help? Who did the mysterious truck belong to? Who was that woman with a baby? Was she somehow connected to the missing friends? It was impossible to know, but the fact that there had been a second vehicle on the same road where the friends would later disappear was not something that could be taken lightly. What if the people in the trucks had led the unsuspecting friends there? What if they were the ones who had harassed them? At that time, an investigative lead opened up that led to a dead end, but it always raised suspicions. What if the friends had gotten into trouble with someone at the basketball game?
And what if, for some reason, they had messed with the wrong person?
For a long time, there was a rumor that people who had been at the same game as the friends, they had seen them step in to defend a woman who was being mistreated by her partner. Could it have been the pregnant woman? Had the friends tried to help her and ended up condemning themselves? The woman from the store and the red truck. March 3rd, a woman who worked at a store 48 kilometers from where the Mercury was found said she had seen the missing men. According to her statement, she had seen 4 of the 5 young men on the morning of February 25th. They had all gotten out of a red pickup truck, and 2 of them had come into her store to buy candy. The description she gave of the subject's clothing matched the information the police had. It was information that hadn't been made completely public. On the other hand, some relatives confirmed the fascination the friends had for certain chocolates and candies. The woman was without a doubt a reliable witness, or so they assumed. The most curious thing was that a pickup truck appeared again. And what if they were the ones who had chased them? Although during those days, the investigators received hundreds of calls from different people claiming to have seen the missing men, all of them were eventually dismissed for not being entirely solid. All of them except for this woman's. However, many believe that the clerk lied and was only looking for a reward. And this makes a lot of sense if we stick to what would eventually be revealed. One way or another, days, weeks, and months went by. The families didn't want to give up. But they had no choice but to accept that what was on the horizon was not encouraging at all. There were no signs of a ransom demand, no traces, nothing to help them know what step to take. Next, simply put, the friends had vanished without a trace. Sooner rather than later, those clues faded away and the case went back to square one, at least until a second testimony emerged, as strange as it was revealing. What were the friends doing in that vehicle? Why were only 4 of them there? Who was missing and where were they? Why didn't they seem worried if they had to leave their vehicle? When they no longer expected good news, that's when the bad news came with full force. And that's how our story returns to the beginning. When the thaw finally began, the horror emerged. June 4th, 1978. Some motorcyclists found a forest maintenance cabin in the Plumas forest. It didn't take them long to discover the body of Ted Wire inside. The man was lying on an improvised bed, covered with many carefully placed sheets, as if someone had tucked him in. His beard suggested that he had survived at least 13 weeks since the disappearance. He had no shoes, but his feet were gangrenous, severely frostbitten, and he had lost between 30 and 45 kilos. In the cabin, there was untouched canned food, matches, paper, blankets, everything needed to survive, but nothing had been used. The fireplace had not been lit, even though it was clear that it had been very cold there. Not even one of the numerous propane tanks, which would have been enough to heat the entire caravan, had been opened. No one had even bothered to cover the broken window that had been smashed to get in. On a table next to the bed were some of Wire's personal belongings, his wallet, his ring with his name on it, and a gold chain he always wore. There was also a gold watch without its glass on the table, which Wire's family claimed did not belong to him. On the side, they found a pair of shoes that didn't match Ted's. They were Gary's. So, at least 2 of the friends had made it to that place alive. Where was Gary? Had he taken Ted's shoes? A closer inspection determined that the food cans had been opened with a can opener that both Gary and Madruga knew how to use, thanks to their training in the army. Did that explain it? Why was Ted so thin, despite being surrounded by food? When he left, his friend hadn't known how to use the element and had given himself a slow and painful death. Ted's family explained that, because of his condition, the man usually had a very rigid attitude toward things. He was unable to improvise and always avoided getting into trouble. So they claimed that it was possible he might have chosen to starve to death if the other option was to take food that didn't belong to him. They also talked about his lack of common sense in some extreme cases. It was known, for instance, that in his youth he didn't want to leave his room, which was on fire, because he was afraid of waking up and being late for work. In other words, he had prioritized following the rules over survival. This could explain some things, but it left several loose ends. In any case, the discovery generated enough momentum for new searches to be carried out. And then the bad news got worse. Outside, almost 30 kilometers from the abandoned car, more remains were found. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were near a tree, both dead from exposure to the cold. Their bodies were partially eaten by animals. Later, they found the remains of Jack Hewitt scattered among the bushes. In fact, it was his father who found his spine. Later, a police officer would find his skull. In an area northwest of the caravan, the searchers found 3 blankets and a rusty flashlight on the road. It couldn't be determined how long they had been there. Nothing was known about Gary Matias. If he had gone to look for help and hadn't made it, where was his body? Given his condition as a schizophrenic, his photographs were distributed to mental institutions all over California. Was it in vain? To this day, his disappearance remains unsolved. In less than a week, and thanks to the changing seasons, 4 of the missing people had been found. But the mystery was far from being solved, and there were still unanswered questions. Authorities would later discover that a snowcat vehicle had cleared the snow to make its way to the trailer where Ted had been found, February 23rd, which could have given the men the illusion that they were in an area where Forest Service employees might return soon. It was also believed that Gary had convinced the group to head to Forstown, an area between Chico and the mountain road, to visit a friend who lived there. It was possible that Madrugas had missed the turn and they got lost, driving further and further into the darkness until the snow stopped the Mercury. Others theorized that they ran into someone dangerous or an event that altered their judgment. On the other hand, much was said about Gary. And what if, due to lack of medication, he had succumbed to madness and led everyone to certain death? The police never ruled out the crime, nor did the families. Melba Madruga, Jack's mother, told the Washington Post that she believed something had led the group astray. Her exact words were, "I'm sure they never went up there alone. It's clear that they were either tricked or threatened." Going back to the idea that the friends might have had a problem with someone, maybe the rush to escape caused the infamous wrong turn. This would explain why the car was abandoned and why the men ran into the woods and, unfortunately, got lost. Maybe Joe's scream had scared them even more, and that's why they panicked. Another line of investigation believes that the police, who always appeared cooperative, actually have a lot to hide. Apparently, Gary's sister had a romance that ended badly with a member of the mafia. Although no one ever fully confirmed it, it's believed that Gary may have threatened the man. According to some, from that moment on, the young man had been targeted by thugs who, on February 24th, followed him to kill him. Then they scared his friends until they met the same tragic end. Did this make sense? Was there a very dangerous mafia family in Yuba with connections in law enforcement? Did the police make sure that Gary's body was never found to prevent people from finding out it was a settling of scores? In fact, a podcast released a few years ago added another layer of uncertainty to an already strange case. The Phantom. The podcast Yuba County 5 by Mopac Audio was made after a group of journalists obtained a complete digitized copy of the police files on the case for the first time. While reviewing it, the professionals found an internal memo from the Yuba sheriff, dated October 8, 2020. It said, "It is believed that Gary Matias was the victim of a crime. This case remains open as a missing person case. Cross out homicide. It is in the best interest of everyone involved that this letter is not sent to the Matias family." What kind of evidence could the sheriff have to reach that conclusion so many years later? Why is it emphasized that the family of the missing man could not find out about the possibility of a homicide? Is it just protocol, or is there something more? Today, so many years later, this case still sparks debates. While some argue that it was all a series of unfortunate events that led to an unprecedented tragedy, others believe that unknown forces were at play. There are even those who think that the key lies with Joe, the man who had the heart attack. What if his testimony wasn't honest? Over time, the man showed some contradictions in his statements, and it was discovered that he had a reputation for being an alcoholic and erratic. What if he had a problem with the 5 friends? What if confronting them had led to the heart attack? What if he had threatened them, and that's why the others ran away? What do you think happened? What explanation do you find? What theories come to mind? I'm going to read you down here in the comments, so write what you think happened. Trying to figure out the last hours of the 5 friends from Yuba City is an exercise that detectives all over the world are still engaged in, always hoping to find some clue that might have been overlooked until now. The most widely accepted explanation suggests that the men left the car together, that 2 of them stopped because of an injury or exhaustion, and that the others made it to the shelter. It is believed that from there, they tried to organize themselves to go help those who had been left behind on the way. It is believed that things didn't go as they expected, they got lost and couldn't find their way back. They all would have died after the first night, except for Ted, who would have stayed in the shelter without the ability to open more food or make fire. But once again, all of this is just a possibility. Also, it still doesn't shed light on why the friends ended up on that road. If Gary were still alive, something that can't be ruled out, he would be 73 years old at the time this video was recorded. His parents said that when he was discharged from the army, he walked several kilometers back home. Apparently, walking was something that calmed him. What if this saved him? What if Gary walked, and never stopped? What if he had managed to find the strength to overcome adversity? Could it be that the subject managed to get out of the forest and that his tormented mind made him rebuild his life? Far from his family and his beloved hometown of Yuba? Maybe he experienced such a trauma that, combined with his illness, made him forget his past? Is he still out there somewhere? Is it buried somewhere in his memory, the missing piece to close this case? For now, it remains a possibility, perhaps the last one we have left to try to give a clear answer to one of the greatest mysteries of recent years.